All my respected God brothers and God sisters, Hare Krishna, assembled Vaishnavas. After Gunarnava Prabhu's offering, what can we say? It was written with so much love for an old friend. I'm sad that Vishal has gone, and at the same time, I'm very happy for Vishal. The other day from the Jamuna, I sent a picture of his cremation ceremony to His Holiness Shivram Swami Maharaj. And Maharaj replied, "Who is that?" And I said, "Vishal Prabhu." He said, "Did I know him?" And I said, "Yes, everybody knew Vishal. He was the big devotee who was always jolly, always was wearing a Shastra bag on his body, and he always loved distributing Srila Prabhupada's books." And Shiva Maharaj went, "No, he left." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Good job, Vishal. You did it in Vrindavan." So naturally we're sad that we don't have the association of our wonderful God brother, but we're very happy for him. He's done something that I've always prayed for. We were here at the time when Srila Prabhupada went to Samadhi, and that I was the cook at ISKCON at that time. The other day at the Jamuna, I was talking to Kishan Lal. I don't know if any of you all know who Kishan Lal is, but he's been working at ISKCON since the property was first taken. And he was telling me stories about Vishal. He was telling me how Vishal always carried candies in his pocket, prasadam candies, so he could always give prasadam to the children. He told me at one point, Vishal, in the early days, every time he would leave the guest house, if there were like some poor people, their children outside, he'd give them 20 rupees. So we were remembering so many things. I looked at Kishan, I said, ISKCON has had so many temple presidents over here in Vrindavan. Who has been the craziest? And Kishan, he just smiled and he wouldn't say anything. And then I looked at him and I said, "And who was the best cook?" And when I said that, he threw his arms around me and he said, "You, of course, Maharaj." I was the cook back then. When I came to Vrindavan, first time in 76, and in 77 when I came back, Vishal was one of the first people that I met, and we became friends. And he was always jolly, he was always kind. Vishal understood, he soon realized that I was from down south in America. And believe it or not, I think Vishal was from North Carolina or from someplace. And whenever we would meet, he would always greet me with the accent that the southern people speak in America. It was like, "Hey y'all, how you boys doing? You doing all right now, prabhu?" Always jolly. There wouldn't be a time that I ever met Vishal, and after like exchanging kind words to one another, sitting with one another, he'd reach inside of his bag and he'd pull out prasad and he would give me prasad without fail. One story that he told me about himself Was at the time of the opening, I guess the year after the opening of Krishna Balaram Mandir. He was living here. And Srila Prabhupada would do parikram of the temple every day. And generally when Prabhupada would do parikram of the temple, Prabhupada would be very angry. Now generally we don't think a lot about Srila Prabhupada's angry mood, but Srila Prabhupada's disciples from all over the world had, worked so hard to build Sri Krishna Balaram Mandir here in Vrindavan, and the fact that it wasn't being managed nicely would really, really put Prabhupada in a lot of anxiety. So Vishal told me how he was walking around the temple, Prabhupada was circumambulating the temple. If you'd see like a light over here above this door going out, it was like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, the light was on, Prabhupada would just stop and he would look at his disciples and he'd say, "You are blind! You cannot see!" And then the devotees would start to tremble. And then he'd take his cane and he'd point it at the light and he would say, "Just see, Krishna's energy is being burnt. You're doing nothing about it. How can you manage?" And he was like that. But Vishal Prabhu, he said every morning when Prabhupada was walking around with the big devotees, the managers, he would stand in the front, right at the front of the temple. And he'd have his hands folded like this. And every day when Prabhupada would pass by, "Chintamani prakara sadma sukalpa briksha," and Prabhupada would look at him. Prabhupada was in an angry mood, and then Prabhupada would continue around the temple. And he'd come back, and Vishal, would chant, "Chintamani prakara sadma sukalpa briksha," and Prabhupada would look at him. And he said like third time around, Prabhupada looked at him, and he's like chanting like this, and Prabhupada looked at him and said, "Why don't you shut up and do something useful?" Well, Vishal said, "I love that so much." He said, "I love that so much that my spiritual master spoke to me that way." In English we have the saying, you can't judge a book by looking at the cover of the book. And a lot of times from the external perspective, people might have perceived Vishal from his, he had a kind of eccentric nature. Although, for myself, because I'm eccentric, we always just sort of came together and we had a good time whenever we were together. Pardon? Eccentrically, we eccentrically had a good time together. But he always had Prabhupada's books inside of his bag. And he was, in the beginning, all the ISKCON devotees, they carried what they called their Shastra bag. You couldn't go anywhere without having your bag on with some book inside that you're going to, if you had a few minutes during the day, you're going to sit and read that book. He always had a book. He loved studying Prabhupada's books. And he always used to tell me, he would tell me, I joined so early in San Francisco, and like so many other people, I had been, caught in the maze of psychedelia in San Francisco. And he would say, I think that I was too much caught in that whole mood of psychedelia. He said, and I think that it burned holes in my brain. He said, I can't remember so much what I read in Prabhupada's books, but there's nothing more that I like to do than read Srila Prabhupada's books. So at the time Prabhupada passed away, I was the cook, and I remember all of the devotees, they took Prabhupada on Prikram, and I couldn't go because I had to stay back and cook the feast. myself and Narottam and Riksharaj, we stayed back. And they brought Prabhupada back, then put Prabhupada in Samadhi. And I remember standing there and just like praying, and my prayer would always be, Srila Prabhupada, please just allow me to give up my life in Vrindavan. Please let me be like you. Please let me be like you in so many ways, with your kindness and your compassion and that big, beautiful, open, non-judgmental heart that you have. And let me follow you and pass away in Vrindavan. And the other day I was thinking, and Vishal did it, because he was blessed. I'm not sure, what year did he actually come to Vrindavan? You know? Well, when I came in 76 for a visit, he was here. And he may have been here. Smara, do you know what time, you know what year he came here?
About 73 he came.
He came in 73. And except for a few years when there were visa problems, Vishal Prabhu spent his whole life in the dust of Vrindavan. He practically lived here for 50 years in Radharani's sacred dham. Shri Radha and Krishna, Radhasham Sundar, Krishna Balaram sacred dham, Vrindavan. How blessed is a person like that? You know, we may see something eccentric from the outside, but just think, 47 years he lived in the dust of Vrindavan. How blessed he was. 47 years in Vrindavan, he practiced Krishna consciousness, following the instructions of his spiritual master. And undoubtedly, like all of us, you know, Vishal had his high points and he had his low points. But because Krishna consciousness doesn't go without struggles, there's always struggles in Krishna consciousness. But he was here. And he loved Vrindavan, and he loved the Brajabasis, and he loved his spiritual master. So though I'm sad, and Panch can, you know, he can attest to the fact that at least 2-3 times over the past number of months I've asked Panchagoda, where is Vishal? Because I wanted to see Vishal. About a month ago I went to the MVT shop one day. I put my mask on and I bundled up and I went to the shop to buy something, and when I came back it was evening time and I saw there's one elderly Israeli devotee who lives here. He's kind of big also, and he walks on sticks. And I was thinking it was Vishal, and I went up to him and I said, Prabhu, excuse me, what is your name? Because I didn't know if it was Vishal or not. I wanted to see Vishal. And I'm sad that I didn't have the chance to see Vishal before he left. I mentioned how I had spoken to Kishan Lal on the banks of the Jamuna the other day, who was the craziest temple president in the past 47 years that you've been with this guy here, and he wouldn't comment. No, he said Deen Bandhu was good temple president. He said Deen Bandhu was a very nice man. You won't believe it, despite the fact that I'm, you know, zero in managerial skills. I'm lost. Somehow or other, even I had a stint as being the temple president in Vrindavan. From the summer of '83 until Gopurnima of '84. Huh? I'm sorry to hear that. And you know, ISKCON Vrindavan at that time, it was strange. I mean, we had the Gurukula, and the Gurukula hated everybody else in the temple. And we had the temple, And the temple hated everybody else in the project. And we had the guest house with one Bengali devotee who was in charge, and he hated everybody else. So everybody was just busy hating one another. Then I was sent here to be the temple president. And I was going, my God, what to do? And I didn't know what to do other than to make sure that there was good prasad all the time. And I used to try to grab devotees from all the different departments and stuff them inside of buses, and we would go to places like, you know, Farrukhabad and Etawah and this place and that place, and we'd have Harinam programs and just try to get devotees preaching together. I mean, Burijan used to come with us, and Jagatarini Mataji, and Gurupad, their son, he was about 3 years old at the time. And, you know, we'd have like thousands of Indians there, and Gurupad would get up in front of the microphone and go, "You are not the body. Chant Hare Krishna." And the crowd would go crazy. And sometimes I get Vishal to go also. And because I saw that Vishal at that time, he was a little bit like lonely, little sort of like alienated sometimes, a little too much to himself. I said, I should spend time with Vishal. And Vishal was round, and I was round. So I was thinking, you know, what can I do? And I went out and I bought a couple of really, really cheap Indian bicycles. And Vishal and I used to go on rides together. You know, we used to go, one day we rode to Mathura back then, and he was in bliss. And, you know, we spent a lot of time together. And then when I was leaving in when I was leaving in, I guess, after Gopurnima, 84, I went to see Vishal one day, and I offered my obeisances, and I said, Prabhu, I'm leaving. And, you know, we offered obeisances. And he was a wrestler also when he was in college or sometime. So we'd always have wrestling matches. I mean, when I hear that people say that Vishal didn't like people touching him, that's curious, because we used to like get down and he would like pull all of his wrestling holds on me and turn me upside down, and I would try to pin him down. And I was saying, Vishal, I've so much appreciated having your association. He said, Ayodhya-padi Prabhu, I've so much appreciated having your association. He said, but I'd like to tell you something. And it's a lesson that I got from the lips of Vishal that I keep to this very day. You know, I was saying goodbye, and he said, I'd like to tell you something. And he looked at me, he said, you're a nice person. He said, but you have to be careful because you're proud. And when I heard him say that, it wasn't like I became angry, or I was like thinking, you're telling me that I'm proud when you have so many things like this. For me, it was sort of like, you know, from his lips, you know, words from my spiritual master and Sri Krishna were coming. It was a very nice instruction. So I'm sad that he's gone, but I'm happy that he left in Vrindavan, and I have faith that this time, you know, by the grace of Srila Prabhupada and by the grace of the dust of Vrindavan, now he's with, you know, Krishna Balaram and Radhe Shyam, and he's doing what he always hankered to do. Vishal Prabhu ki jai. Hare Krishna.
So we'd like to thank His Holiness BB Govinda.